Joining me now to kick this around and chew on it is my great pal, Steve Forbes, Forbes Media Chairman and Editor-in-Chief. So, Chuck Schumer, raise taxes. That will conquer inflation. Let's start there. I mean, there's a lot of things for us to talk about. Let's start with Chuck Schumer's dictum and his advice. What do you think?
Well, it's what doctors did 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and they had a patient. They believed you cured the patient by bleeding the patient.
Yes.
That cured the patient because it got rid of the patient. His raising taxes, you just alluded to, will not get rid of the economy, but damage the economy. When is hurting an economy good for fighting inflation or anything else?
Stephen, people don't pay their fair share. That's what Biden said again at his press conference today. Actually, he said this is a new wrinkle. He just referred to Republicans as not paying their fair share. I don't know what he meant by that.
Well, what he meant was his version of a flat tax, which is top line, what did you make? Bottom line, send it in. It'll only apply to Republicans.
Okay. What did you think of the report today? Do you think we're in a recession?
Not yet. And this is what is so might give you sleepless nights, is the Fed has just started to work its harmful policies.
Yeah.
And so the second quarter, I think, will recover. The idea that government spending is positive for GDP, I think, is preposterous, but that's the way they calculate these things. So you'll see a better second quarter. But the Fed's damage will come later in the year and next year. They believe you have to slow the economy down to cure inflation instead of stabilizing the value of the dollar. Now, people forget, in the 1980s and through at least through the late 1990s, we had a what you might call an informal gold standard. Greenspan, the Fed chairman, said he looked at that very closely and commodity indexes and tied the dollar to it, roughly. So it was a very sloppy one, but it certainly is better than what we have today.
I notice on this point, I want to come back to the GDP report, but on this important point you raised, the exchange rate of the dollar is quite strong against other currencies, but there's a little bit, not a lot, but commodity indexes are tipping down. Is that of any interest or significance to you in the fight against inflation?
Well, why is it happening? Because Europe looks like it's going to go into a recession. China's doing its level best to erect the supply chains even more by ridiculously closing down, locking down cities like Shanghai, when we know that doesn't work. And as you mentioned, this administration is still putting obstacles in the way. Just a couple of weeks ago, they brought in rules that the Trump administration streamlined that's going to make much more difficulty in doing infrastructure. It's going to take years, thousands of pages of unreadable gibberish that nobody reads, but it's delay. And delay means more cost, which means higher prices.
So I want to come back to that. Basically, the GDP deflator, which is a very broad-based measure of inflation. It's one the Fed looks at, that plus the so-called PCE deflator. So that hit 8% today in the first quarter, Steve. I think it was higher than consensus expected. I'm having a hard time, honestly, putting politics aside, just looking at the empirics here. Getting down from an 8% inflation without a recession, I'm having a hard time getting from here to there. I guess it's possible, but I'm just wondering, 8% is a high inflation rate. Is there a soft landing out there, really?
Well, most of the time when the Fed tries a soft landing, this is why you should never let them near an airplane, they end up with a crash landing. And so in this case, a large part of that is supply chain problems, what this administration is making worse. If they just step back, that would be extremely helpful. Bring back the XL pipeline. That would tell the world we're changing things. Say we're going to be the supplier of natural gas to Europe and give those LNG permits streamlined and get them through, green light them. And on the Fed side, just say we're out for a stable dollar. So stop trying to manipulate interest rates. Yes, reduce the money supply, but let the dollar be the guide. And you point out the dollar being strong against other currencies. They're very strong against, for example, the yen. That's a weak yen more than a strong dollar. Japan has got some troubles coming. And so you've got to look at, and in terms of commodity prices, we say, that's a sign of a weakening economy, not because they're getting their act together on money.
All right, so we're not in the recession yet. You agree with that point? We're not.
But we're flirting with it dangerously. We're going to the edge of the cliff.
Yeah, that's why it's funny. I mentioned it in the riff. I called it the front end of a recession. We could be at the front end of a recession, and I'm quite worried about it. And with policy prescriptions to hike taxes, I think that is exactly wrong, as you have pointed
Well, I hope
out.
Schumer goes with that with the voters, and I think he'll have as much success as Walter Mondale. Remember him? He ran against Reagan back in 1984 for a second term. And he started his nominating speech at the San Francisco convention saying, I'm going to raise your taxes. Well, that was the campaign. Taxes, up or down. Mondale carried 1 state. Reagan carried 49, which led to the path to the 86 tax cut, where, among other things, we cut the top rate from 50% down to 28%.
So, okay, I like to say the cavalry's coming, and that's a Republican and conservative red wave. But I want to raise a point with you. Some Republicans, I don't know, maybe as many as a dozen Republicans, I don't know, in the Senate, have been and will vote for this China compete bill, or whatever it's called. You follow this?
Yes.
The Senate came out with $250 billion, and the House came out with $350 billion. They're in conference, or they're going into conference. We had Senator Lummis on yesterday. She doesn't think the conference is going to change much, and therefore she will continue to vote against that. But there must be a dozen to 15 Republicans. How the heck, with an 8% inflation rate, putting aside the stupid, I mean, this is the more like China bill. We're going to have subsidies and corporate welfare and industrial policy and state control of the economy. It's absolutely crazy. But they're spending another $250 billion, and Republicans are chiming in. I mean, I think this is unpardonable.
Well, if it was $250 billion for defense, you could say, okay, they're getting their act together in the world we live in today. But this bill, if you see some of the offices they're creating about the government evaluating future, like they're a venture capitalist, future technologies, if they know what they are, and they don't even know what we have today. And so, again, as you point out, this is like being like China. Why should the government be taking resources away and thinking they can allocate it better and ramp things better than the free private sector? So it's one thing to fund R&D, areas of military hardware and the like, but otherwise, let the private sector run with it. They say, oh, the Defense Department invented the internet. No, it didn't. It was thwarted by 10 years by being stuck in the Defense Department. They sort of stumbled into it. Others contributed to it. And when it was finally released, we saw what happened. Give it to the private sector.
And interestingly, even the Semiconductor Trade Association has pointed out time and again, there is presently $200 billion of private investment money going into projects.
See it.
Right now, they're already building the projects before this goofy bill comes out. But, Steve, we have to track this. A bunch of Republican senators are voting for this, and I don't think they deserve our support at all, whether it's election or re-election. I mean this sincerely, because part of the inflation solution has got to be to freeze domestic spending. It's just got to be. And stop the deficit finance, which encourages the Fed's money printing. Give you the last word.
Well, that's right. That's why Taiwan Semiconductors are investing over $10 billion in Arizona.
Right.
Intel is, even though they...
Before this bill.
Yeah, and Intel foolishly is backing this bill, but they're investing tens of billions of dollars for new foundries and the like. So again, let people do it, and they'll come up with better ways and faster ways, and the economy will recover. Let the economy recover. And I hope the cavalry, as you alluded to earlier, knows what to do instead of just showing up and saying, let's fire our guns in the air.
That is the truth. I hear the bugles, but sometimes I'm not too sure of the strategy. Anyway, Steve Forbes. Front end of recession, folks. He believes me. There's a risk here.